Today we continue work on Michael's Mk3. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I guess where we should start is with the engine for Michael's car. We made a trip to the machine shop this week, and we went ahead and we had the flywheel resurfaced. So as you can see here, our buddies over at Rancho Machine went ahead and surfaced this flywheel for us, and it looks perfect. We'll give it one wipe down before we mount the clutch to it, and then it'll be ready for the clutch and the transmission. Since we're talking about the clutch and the transmission, we did get a delivery from Mike Forte over at Forte's Parts Connection. Mike sent us out a brand new TKX transmission and the bell housing that goes with it. In this case, it is a Tremec bell housing for the 4.6 liter, and that's in this box right here. So nice piece we've got there for the bell housing. And then Mike sent us out some other stuff here too. We've got a brand new ram clutch. Mike sent us one of his clutch cable kits, which includes 2 Ford stock clutch cables. We've got a, looks like a throwout bearing in there as well. So we've got everything that I think we need to put the clutch and bell housing and transmission into Michael's car. The only thing I haven't checked for is to see whether the mount that we have now, which is the stock Mustang mount for the transmission, to see if that's going to work, or whether we're going to have to order an aftermarket transmission mount. But we'll take a look at that and see if that's going to work for us, because that mount's in really good condition. Okay, while we're back here where the transmission is resting, we have a collection of intake manifolds. We have this one that Michael purchased a while back, which is just a stock 4.6 liter dual overhead cam intake manifold. And then we have this one right here, which is the 1999 through 2004, I believe, Cobra intake manifold. Now, there are slight differences in between them. I don't know enough about these to tell you exactly what all those differences are, but the primary difference on the appearance is the fact that this one has the Cobra logo. Now that is just a badge. However, that badge fits in a specific recess in the upper intake manifold. So what we plan to do, and I know little about these overhead cam, dual overhead cam, etc., mod motors, but it's my understanding from what Michael has told me that this Cobra intake, the 1999 Cobra intake lower, does not flow the same as the later 2004 dual overhead cam lower intake manifold. So our plan at this point is to take these two intake manifolds and meld them into one. We're going to use the lower from this manifold. We're going to use the upper from this manifold. We're going to disassemble everything. We are going to probably take these over to the same machine shop that I had do the flywheel, and I'm going to have them put them in their hot tank. They have one of these high pressure, high temperature parts washers. They're going to wash both the upper of this one and the lower of this one, and then we're going to take them over to our powder coater, and I think we're going to have these either powder coated or ceramic coated, and we're going to let the powder coat guy tell us which would be better for the intake manifold, because I don't think it's going to see enough temperature that it needs to be ceramic coated. However, in some instances, ceramic coating is easier to maintain, especially in some of the more glossy finishes, than powder coat. The powder coat in certain conditions has a tendency to haze, and the ceramic will stay shiny. So we'll let the powder coater tell us exactly which one is going to be the best for this, and we'll let the powder coater and Michael decide. I think I'm going to take Michael down to the powder coater with me, and that way he can talk with my guy down there, and they can kind of figure out what they want to do. So that's what we got going with the intakes. And on top of that, we still have the intake that's on the engine, which you can see after we cleaned the engine is actually in really good condition. I mean, it's much cleaner than either of those two intake manifolds that we have over on the floor. I'm hoping maybe the end of today, as I'm kind of wrapping up things here in the shop, it's Saturday, I'm hoping that I can get those intake manifolds taken apart and get them ready to have the machine shop clean those up for us. Over on the car, we have taken some time this past week, and we worked on the airbox for the heater blower motor and got that all wrapped up. I'm really happy with the way that came out. We wanted to make the front panel of that box removable, and as I hemmed and hawed around about how we were going to do that, I thought I was going to use riv nuts. And when it came right down to it, I thought that although the riv nuts might be a little bit easier if the front cover ever had to come off, the actual rivets look nicer. And so with a little bit of time, and I haven't counted them exactly, but probably just a couple more than a dozen rivets, we can have that front cover come off, and the blower motor itself will come out of there. There are two plugs for electrical connectors. The wiring, which is now coming out of the side over here, can disconnect, and the blower motor can come out. It doesn't fall out, but at the same time, it's easy enough that if we had to replace the blower motor because it gave up the ghost, we could do it. So that's pretty much done. I haven't had any more time this past week to work on the box that we're going to do on the inside for the heater core. But I think I'm going to do the same thing. I just kind of spent an hour or so each night working on the box for the blower motor. I made cardboard templates. When I was happy with how the cardboard templates kind of assembled, then I moved to making the metal panels out of the aluminum. And I had to kind of look at this as far as the sequence on how everything went together, because if I put the wrong panel in first, I was going to have difficulty with the next panel. So for instance, even though I made the side panel here first, the first panel that got riveted in was the opposite side, which is this outside or inside piece over here. And then the top had to go in. And the reason the top had to go in next is because it actually rivets in to the bottom of this 3/4 inch square tube. And with the side panel on, it would be hard to get the rivet gun, and the drill for that matter, in to fasten that top panel in. So that was the next one. So it was a sequence to get everything kind of situated and assembled to where we didn't have to take steps backwards in order to get it in there. So a simple little box like that really became more complicated just because it had to be assembled in a particular sequence. Then what we did to make the box as airtight as we could, and remember, we have underneath here, we've got a 4-inch hole that's going to draw air from the inside of the cockpit to supply that blower motor. And that's the whole reason for the box. We didn't want to pull that air from the engine compartment into the blower motor to feed into the car, because this car is going to have a hard top and it's going to have windows. So with that, we tried to contain as much of the air in the box and not have it leaking out. So all of these panels are sealed. So at each one of the joints, what we did was we took some of the heat and sound mat, even you can see a strip of it back here. We took and cut like 2-inch strips of the heat and sound mat, and we put those in all the corners and worked them down flat so that we sealed as much of the airflow in the box as we could, and tried to keep the blower motor from pulling in air from under the engine, under the engine or in the engine compartment and under the hood. So even these panels that went on last, even though we couldn't put the heat and sound mat on the edges there, what we did on these is we actually used the sealant, the clear sealant, along here and along the bottom as these panels went in, and therefore we've sealed out as much air as we possibly can. The only other place that it can pull air in is through the grommet in the side of it for the wiring, and I tried to make that grommet as small as possible so that we kept airflow from being pulled in from there too. So time will tell. I think we're going to have airflow primarily just from the cockpit, but we'll have to see how it goes. But I'm not too worried about it. So we'll move on to the driver's compartment and the heater core probably during the evenings this week, and see if for the next video maybe we have something to show you guys on that. The Holley system is in. It is not fully wired yet because obviously we don't have an engine in yet. We did take the main fuse for the Holley, and you can actually see it right here. So that connector with the red wires coming out of it, that is the main fuse for the Holley. That's a 30 amp fuse for the main on that. And then right next to it, we did install our turn signal relays. So we've got some turn signal relays that we put in there. I'll get to those in just a few minutes. The Holley system, what we're working through right now is I've actually got some of the harness pulled apart. We pulled the outer covering off of the harness. And what we're trying to do is get as much of this stuff that doesn't need to be in the engine compartment located on the inside of the firewall. So what I'm trying to do is get all these connectors and all this wiring that doesn't need to be in the engine compartment kind of pulled back in the harness to a point where from like this point forward, from this point this way, this will go through the firewall, and then all of the other associated connectors, the power takeoff, the supply for the coils and stuff like that, all is going to be in the engine compartment of the car. Just trying to clean up as much of the stuff under the hood as we can so that we don't have any unnecessary wires out there. We are also going to work on the supply wire. This is the supply fuse for the fuel pump in the Holley system. We will be taking the wire out of this and running it over to our Ron Francis relay, and the Ron Francis harness will actually feed the fuel pump power, but it will be triggered by the Holley system. And you can do it two ways. You can take the red out of here, which comes off the fuel pump relay that Holley provides. Or if you want to eliminate this relay, you can actually use this black wire and trigger the negative side of the Ron Francis fuel pump relay. We're choosing to use the hot wire, and we're going to leave this relay in place. This fuse here and the main Holley fuse that's over there are going to be the only fuses that will not be in the Ron Francis harness. But these two will be located right next to one another, and those will be on that same mounting plate that we're using for the Holley Terminator X system. The other things that we've been working on in the car are obviously some wiring. We picked up a ground cable for the main chassis ground, and so that still needs to be terminated. I've just got it in here kind of to check for length, because I was kind of stuck. They had, I think it was a 32-inch cable at the local parts yard, or Parts House, and then they had a 48-inch cable, and we fall somewhere in between there. We need something like a 36, 37-inch cable. So what I'll probably end up doing is I'll get this exactly where I want it. I'll cut the end off, and I'll put a new ring terminal on the end of it, and then we'll have the exact size cable that we need. So the back of the car is pretty much taken care of, with the exception of two things. I want to use a piece of this black wire to create a secondary ground for the fuel pump, like we did on the Texas car. So this will go from the fuel pump connector, which is over here. So we've got the sending unit, which is the gray, and we've got the fuel pump, which is the red. And so we're going to tie on to this black wire here with the black wire that we have right here. And we're going to run that over to our ground stud, which is just below this roll bar mount underneath the trunk aluminum, and give the fuel pump a secondary source of ground. One other thing that we still have left to wire in the back of the car, as far as the main harness anyway, is we had discussion this past week about a audio system for the car. And I think what we're going to do, we did something similar on the silver car that we finished last year, is we're going to put a panel in here just behind the roll bars, and we are going to open up the cockpit wall here from about this point right here where the side of the trunk is, and all the way down there to that side of the trunk, and create a package tray. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put a panel in here, and that panel is going to allow us to mount two 6x9 speakers and a Bluetooth stereo amplifier. And then, depending on the depth of the 6x9 speakers, we're going to put another panel, which will be removable, whatever distance we need to clear the magnets of the speakers, the 6x9 speakers, and create a secondary partition, and that's going to make our speaker box, our speaker / amp box. What that means as far as electrical for the back is we're going to need, depending on the amp draw of the amplifier, we're going to need probably a number 12 or a number 10 supply wire, along with a trigger wire. So essentially, whenever you turn the ignition to accessory or to ignition, you're turning the amplifier on, because with the Bluetooth won't turn the amp on. It has to already be on. And we're going to run the power for the amplifier directly to the Ron Francis chassis harness. We're going to probably pull off of one of the fuse circuits in there, depending on how many amps, again, it pulls. If it's a 30 amp, then we'll probably pull from the heater circuit, because we're not running heat and air, so we really only need enough amperage for the fan blower motor, and so we can pull power from that from something else. Or we'll have to add a secondary fuse for the amplifier itself, but we'll see. Regardless, I'm going to have to run at least one more wire, either a 10 or a 12, through the Ron Francis harness to the front of the car. And then I'll probably, for the trigger wires, I'll just tie on to one of the speedometer wires that are run through the harness and end up here where the transmission is, because since we're using a GPS speedometer, we're not going to need those vehicle speed sensor wires, and it just keeps me from having to run another cable through that split loom. So other than those two things, the back of the car is pretty much rough wired. The other wiring that we were working on, and I can kind of tell you now what we're doing with these relays. Since we changed the taillights out in this car to a single taillight on each side rather than the 4 round ones that the car came with, we need a way to have both brake light and turn signal utilized by the same lights. And you can do it a number of ways. One way is to use a trailer light converter. They sell those in a number of different configurations. One is a powered, where you actually have a circuit that is dedicated to powering the trailer converter, or you have ones that just utilize the actual flashing circuit and brake light circuit in order to work. Guys actually report differing opinions on each of those choices. I choose to do it the old school way, and that is to put relays in line that are mechanical and, in my opinion, are much more reliable. So each of these ice cube relays is a double pole, double throw relay. And so what we're doing is we're actually taking the Ron Francis harness and the Russ Thompson turn signal, it's in that box, and we're feeding not a flashing signal to the relay to activate it. We're actually using the Russ Thompson to send it constant power. Meaning as soon as you turn the turn signal stalk to activate the right turn signal, it's not sending a flashing signal to it. It's actually just sending a 12 volt to it. And what that does is it allows us to take the brake light out of the circuit while the flashing part of it goes through the relay and flashes the lights. So into the relay, we've got the flashing circuit going to this side of the relay. This is the white wire. And the purple wire is the brake light circuit. So when the relay is activated by the turn signal switch, it opens the brake light circuit, but it closes the turn signal circuit and then allows the power from the flasher to do its thing. And that's both right and left. So I've got them, the yellow is the right and the white is the left. So we're doing the same thing for both sides. So all of our wires are over here for the Russ Thompson turn signal switch. We've got our constant power. We've also got our, high beam and low beam circuits, and I'll get into those in just a second. And we have our turn signal power. So we've got turn signal power that is basically before the flasher, and we've got a turn signal source that is the flashing circuit, and that actually goes directly to the relays. So I'm sure that was enough to confuse just about everybody who was following me to this point, but trust me, it all works when we're done with it. We also went ahead and we lengthened the ground cable from the Ron Francis harness. In the assembly manual, it just has an eyelet on the end of this wire about where my pinky is. And they have you take a self-tapping screw while cleaning off the powder coat from the frame and just using that self-tapping screw to ground to the chassis. And I'm not a big fan of that. We weld on ground studs in differing spots of the car chassis. So we have one here. We have one over on the other side of the car that we're going to ground our heater and our seat heaters to. We have one in the engine compartment of the car that we ran on one of the motor mounts right down there. And then of course we have one in the back of the car that we discussed earlier that the battery cable, the main battery cable, is going to go to. So with all the potential issues you have with grounds if they're not properly attached, we think we alleviate those by having ground studs welded onto the chassis in all those different spots of the car. We also did one of our favorite modifications, and that is to put the headlight switch in our own little aluminum panel that's going to mount right in here. See if I can get that in there with one hand. Probably not. Right there. And then the hole on top is for our hazard light switch, which, I don't know if you saw it, is right here. So this will not be mounted in the dash. This is going to be mounted behind the dash. And it's actually really, this area is really accessible when you're sitting in the car. The way the dash wraps around here, you can just reach in there, turn the headlights on, flip the hazard light switch if you need it. And so we like to put them up there because it really cleans up the dash without a bunch of clutter. Other things. The relay for the cooling fan is in. We've got it mounted on the firewall on the inside of the footbox here. And it actually clears everything, so we're not going to have any interference. But it's still going to be accessible for maintenance. If we have to remove the top panel, we can get to this relatively easy. We did modify the stock clutch safety switch. Basically, it had this same type of clip housing on the outside that the other portion of it has. In the Ford configuration, the safety switch is on one of these sides, and the cruise control deactivation is on the other. So either if you push the brake or if you push the clutch, it deactivates the cruise control. We only need one side of it, so basically I just cut this housing portion off the front, which exposes the two spade connectors and allows us to put the female spade connectors on there and terminate our clutch safety switch. I think that's about got you guys all caught up for this week. I want to thank everyone for watching. We really do appreciate all of the support that we've gotten lately. I wasn't able to get up another video this week, and it disappointed me just as much as it may have disappointed some of you. While I've got all of your attention, I want you all to go over to my buddy Greg's site. Greg does Cobra builds for Factory 5 in Arizona. His page is 520 Speedworks. And Greg does a lot of cool stuff over there. He's also a vendor on the Factory 5 forum. He sells a lot of cool Factory 5 related parts. So go check his page out and see the videos that he's got over there. Again, everybody, thank you for watching. We really do appreciate it. We'll see y'all later.